Hi, welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All magic fun, all cards under $1. I'm David, and we're joined today by one of our playtesters, Lisa.
Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about a fun and effective EDH deck that you can build without breaking the bank. And we have only one rule. All cards need to be under $1, except for the commander.
That's right, and we'd like to remind you at this point in time that we have a Patreon page. So if you like these videos, you'd like to help us make more, consider going over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks and donating as little as $1. It would really help us out a lot. Now, without further ado, let's have a look at our commander, and we have a doozy of a commander for you today because we have Atraxa Praetors Voice for a green, a white, a blue, and a black, so that is for 4 mana. We get a 4/4 Angelic Horror. Now she's got Vigilance, Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and additionally at the beginning of our end step we get to proliferate. Now what is proliferate? It is we're going to be able to choose any number of permanents and or players, and we get to put a counter that is already on there. We get to put an additional counter on there. So what is going to be the role of this commander? It's going to be, number one, to be a beat stick. After all, she's a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink, which means she's great on the offense because she's flying, so that's evasion. She got the Vigilance, which means that we can use her to attack and to block. With the Death Touch, make sure people don't really want to block it or attack into us because it's going to be able to kill anything. And of course, the Lifelink makes sure that we're going to be able to stay in the game by gaining us that extra life every single turn. Secondly, it's also got Proliferate, which means that we're going to be playing a lot with counters, and Atraxa makes sure that at the end of each of our turns, we're going to be able to get more of those counters, so let's get extra value out of that. So Lisa, what are the cards we're going to need to make this deck work?
Well, we need 19 cards that give us +1/+1 counters, 15 cards that have synergy with the counters, 15 removal cards, 12 utility cards, and 38 lands.
Exactly, and an ideal turn progression, what does that look like?
Well, the first turn we don't have anything to play. The second turn we want to have some mana ramp. In the third turn then we can play Atraxa. In the fourth turn we want some protection for her. In turn 5 we want removal for our opponents, and then in turn 6 we want to start getting cards with the +1/+1 counters.
Exactly. Okay, well, speaking of the +1/+1 counters, let's have a look at those. We divided the +1/+1 counter cards into 3 categories. Number 1, the ones that give +1/+1 counters to themselves. Second one is the one that give +1/+1 counters to other cards. And the last one, the ones that give additional +1/+1 counters. All right, we're going to start with the first card, and that is Algae Gharial for 3 and a green. So for 4 mana, we get a 1/1 little crocodile with Shroud, which means nobody can target it. Great little built-in protection against a targeted removal. And additionally, whenever another creature dies, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, great. So as the game progresses, stuff is going to be dying. It's going to be getting bigger and bigger. And of course, with Atraxa, it's going to be getting larger and larger every turn because of the proliferate. So before you know, this thing is going to become massive. And of course, as targeted removal doesn't work, people are going to have to use some form of board wipe against it. So yeah, they're going to really have to use that. Otherwise, this thing's going to stay on the battlefield and it's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Next is Lumberknot for 2 and 2 green. We get a 1/1 tree folk with hexproof. So contrary to the crocodile, we can target this guy with our own stuff. And also whenever another creature dies, it gets +1/+1, so it can grow really fast.
Pretty much actually the same thing, except slightly better than the crocodile. Then we move on to Vulturous Zombie for 3, a black, and a green. So for 5 mana, we get a 3/3 plant zombie. I don't know what a plant zombie is supposed to be, but there you go.
Cool,
it looks super awesome. It's got flying, and whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Vulturous Zombie. So like the Lumberknot and like the Gharial, it is going to be getting a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature dies, but it will also be getting a counter when our opponents are getting milled, or of course when people are discarding cards. So there's a lot more chances for this thing to get bigger, and not to be underestimated is the fact that it has evasion, which means that it's going to be able to be huge, plus difficult to block. Very, very powerful. Nasty, nasty card.
Next is Simic Manipulator for 1 and 2 blue. It's a 0/1 with Evolve, which means that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, which has a higher power or toughness, it grows. It gets a +1/+1 counter. And we can tap it and remove 1 or more of those counters. And then we can gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to the number of +1/+1 counters removed. which means that we can steal our opponent's creatures, and not just for the turn, we get to keep them, which is really cool.
Yeah, very nice. I like this because, first of all, it grows itself. It's going to get a +1/+1 counter pretty much automatically because its power is 0. So anything you play, it's going to get a +1/+1 counter. And then with Atraxa on the battlefield, it's going to be growing anyway. And we're always going to be guaranteed to be able to grab even big stuff. Normally, of course, this grabs only small stuff. But now you'll be able to get big stuff because this deck is built to maximize on those +1/+1 counters. Next card, Altered Ego for X2. A green and a blue, so in essence for 4 or more mana, we're going to get a 0/0 Shapeshifter. Now this guy can't be countered, which is nice for people, those blue heavy decks that are counter heavy. And additionally, we can have this creature enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's going to get X +1/+1 counters, so where X is the additional mana we paid for it. So in essence, we're going to be paying 5 mana or more for this, and then we're going to get the best thing on the battlefield, except it's going to be larger than the best thing on the battlefield because it's going to have a +1/+1 counter or more if we played more mana into it.
Really
and
strong.
of course, this deck loves those +1/+1 counters, so it's probably going to be growing, and when the Atraxa is going to get even bigger. So to add insult to injury, we got the best thing on the battlefield, plus it's going to be bigger than whoever's got the best thing. So actually, we have the best thing. Yeah.
Next is Enduring Scale Lord. For 4, a green and a white, we get a 4/4 Flying Dragon. And whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are placed on another creature you control, Enduring Scale Lord also gets a +1/+1 creature, so counter, sorry.
Yeah.
So it basically grows simultaneous to your other creatures.
Yeah, it likes to share this one. It really thinks, oh, well, you're getting counter. How about you give me some of those counters my way, because then I also get to enjoy those +1/+1 counters. And of course, it's got, not to be underestimated, it has evasion as well. This one's got flying, so that's nice. When we've got really big creatures and they also have the +1/+1 counters, makes it a pain in the butt. Okay, now we're going to move on to the cards that give +1/+1 counters to other cards. First off is Ring of Saturate. For 2 mana, it's an artifact equipment with equip cost of 1. And it has pay 2 mana, regenerate equipped creature. So that's nice. So we're going to put this on Atraxa, for example, and then Atraxa for 2 mana, if we keep that open, it's got a nice little insurance against board wipes or against destroy target creature or deal X damage to the creature, because we can just regenerate her, which is very nice. Also, at the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature if it's black. Well, guess what? Atraxa is black, so every turn, if they don't do that, we're going to be able to put a +1/+1 counter, and this is important. Why? Because Atraxa doesn't come into the battlefield with +1/+1 counters herself. So we're going to want to find ways to put +1/+1 counters on Atraxa to maximize her ability, her proliferate.
Yeah. Okay, so next is Power Conduit. It's an artifact for 2 mana, and we can tap it, and then we can remove a counter from a permanent we control, and then we can choose to either put a charge counter on target artifact, or we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So we can basically move counters around. Also if we have counters on lands, we can put them on creatures and turn them into +1/+1 counters, which makes this a pretty strong card.
Yeah, very nice. It's nice. A lot of cards, as we saw already, coming with their own +1/+1 counters. And this allows us to say, hey, Atraxa still needs one. Why don't we head one over to Atraxa to make sure that she's got, or some other big fatty that requires it. Next, we have is Durable Handicraft for 1 and a green. It's an enchantment that states whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay an additional 1 mana, and then we get to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So it's essentially what it says is you can pay 1 extra mana for whatever creature you're playing, and it also comes in with a counter, which is nice. And additionally, for 5 and a green, so for 6 mana, we can sacrifice this enchantment, and then we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. We don't use that often because then it's gone, and like having that insurance later in the game that we can always put a +1/+1 counter on any creature we play. But it's nice to know that maybe later on in the game you could do an Alpha Strike with all your creatures attacking and then instant speed sacking it, giving all your creatures an extra +1/+1 might be enough to kill your opponent. Who knows?
Okay, so next is Orzhov Advocist. For 2 and a white, we get a 1/4 Human Advisor, which states that at the beginning of our upkeep, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature he or she controls. But if that player does, creatures that player controls cannot attack you or a planeswalker you control until your next turn. So basically, you and your opponents can put +1/+1 counters on their creatures, but if your opponents do, they cannot attack you, but they can attack each other.
Yeah, and that's pretty nice, actually.
Yeah.
Nice little insurance, because Atraxa would love to get those 2 +1/+1 counters, because then at the end of the turn, she's actually got 3, which is pretty sweet. The turns are already on the first turn you've played this. You've already, or the first time this has gone to the upkeep, you got a 7/7, which is going to be pretty nasty. And of course, having your opponents having bigger creatures attacking each other is always nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Forgotten Ancient is next for 3 and a green. We got a 0/3 elemental, and it states that whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on this card. And that's, of course, we're players, and our opponents are players as well, which means whenever people, and we're playing multiplayer, so as soon as this comes down, everybody's going to be playing spells, and then this thing's going to be going, awesome, I'm going to get +1/+1 counters for that. Additionally, at the beginning of our upkeep, we move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto another creature. So this guy basically collects the +1/+1 counters, and then the next turn we're going to go, okay, you want a counter, you get a counter, you get a counter. We get to spread out the love.
Yep. Next is Juniper Order Ranger. For 3, a green and a white, we get a 2/4 Human Knight, which states that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and put a +1/+1 counter on Juniper Order Ranger. So whenever creatures enter the battlefield, they get counters and you get counters.
Yeah, this guy, if you are, of course, Juniper Order Ranger, of course.
if you
put yourself within that into character, then of course that's you. So this thing grows, and of course whichever creature we play grows, which is gross. Then we move on to the cards that give us additional +1/+1 counters. We start with Winding Constrictor. For a black and a green, we get a 2/3 snake, and that's a pretty good body for that mana cost. For just 2 mana, we get a 2/3. That's pretty nice. Also, if one or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature we control, we could put that many counters plus an additional one on that permanent instead. So remember, this one doesn't say +1/+1 counter, so this is any counter that goes on an artifact or a creature, which is pretty sweet. And additionally, if we would get counters, such as, for example, energy counters, then we get another one of those additionally as well. We don't have energy counters in this deck, so it doesn't really matter, but we do have +1/+1 counters and other kinds of counters, so that snake gives us an additional one. It doesn't double, but when you only put 1 counter on it, it's essentially doubling.
Yep. And next card does double. It's Pharrell of the Hull Clade. For 1, a green and a blue, we get a 1/4. And if we pay a green and a blue and we tap it, we get to double the number of counters on a creature, artifact, or land, so not just a creature, which basically means that we can grow our creatures, lands, or artifacts very, very big.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not to be, for example, an awesome target is the zombie plant zombie. That's, of course, a nice target. Lumber Knot is a nice target. You know, creatures that already get a lot of +1/+1, and this one just says, okay, we're going to double that. And remember that it is an ability of a creature, so we can do it instant speed. Yeah. So it's nice. We can attack, and then people might say, oh, it's small enough. You know, it's only a 5/5. I can block it. And then all of a sudden you tap Pharrell. You say, it's not a 5/5 anymore. Now it's a 9/9, for example. I don't know. Yeah. Then we move on to Corpsejack Menace. For 2, a black and a green. So for 4 mana, we get a 4/4 fungus. Now this fungus states that if you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, we put twice that many +1/+1 counters instead. So this one also makes sure we double our +1/+1 counters when they come in. Very nice, very strong. Remember, this is only +1/+1 counters, not -1/-1 counters, not charge counters, not any other kind. But you know what? Most of these cards are going to be looking at +1/+1, so it's essentially doubling all that stuff. Very, very nice. And of course, it also looks like, who does it look like?
The Demigorgon from Stranger Things.
Exactly. That alone warrants its inclusion.
Next card is Thrumming Bird. For 1 and a blue, we get a 1/1 flyer, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can proliferate. Because it's a flyer, chances are high we get to do damage to players, and then we can add extra counters to our creatures, which, yeah, it's a good card. Yeah, exactly. I really like making sure that we put a +1/+1 counter on Thrumming Bird as soon as possible, because then it becomes bigger, and if it gets through, it gets even bigger.
And of course, a creature that at a certain point has flying and is already very large and is able to grow itself every turn by attacking is super powerful. And we can already see that Thrumming Bird, somebody got the instruction to draw this picture and they were just, that Thrumming Bird sounds a lot like Hummingbird. I'm just going to draw a Hummingbird, but just kind of weird. They're lazy. Next card is Tezzeret's Gambit for 3 and 1 Phyrexian blue mana. So Phyrexian blue mana can either be paid with blue or with 2 life. And it's a sorcery that states we could draw 2 cards, then proliferate. So, well, great. So essentially we could pay 2 life, say 3 mana, draw 2 cards, and then add an additional counter on all the good stuff that we've got. Why not?
Next is Fuel for the Cause. For 2 and 2 blue, we get an instant and we can counter target spell and then proliferate. Well, a counter target spell for 4 is actually kind of expensive, but we also get the proliferate, which makes up for it.
Yeah, people never expect that counter spell, so
No.
that is pretty sweet. Then we move on to the last one of the things that give us +1/+1 counters, and that is Spread the Sickness for 4 and a black, so for 5 mana. It's a sorcery, destroy target creature, then proliferate. As with the previous card, 5 mana to destroy a creature at sorcery speed is not super great, but the fact that we got a proliferate attached right to it means we get so much extra value for all our cards that have counters on them. So essentially doubles the stuff, and of course with Atraxa it doubles it again. So it's actually really, really nice getting all those extra counters with Spread the Sickness. Those are the cards that care about or give the +1/+1 counters. Now let's have a look at the cards that have synergy with those counters.
We divided the counter synergy cards into 2 categories. First category is cards that give us abilities, and the second category is cards that give us protection. So the first card of the ones that give abilities is Einok Bondkin. For 1 and a white, we get a 2/1 with Outlast for 1 and a white. And if we pay that and we tap it, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it has first strike. So in combination with Death Touch for Atraxa, this is very powerful.
Exactly. We have to remember, of course, that with Outlast, we can only do that sorcery speed. Of course, normally when we've got abilities on creatures, you can do those instant speed, but not with Outlast. That's kind of sad. But, you know, it's kind of nice that it can give +1/+1 counters to itself.
Yeah.
Next one is Abzan Falconer for 2 and a white. So for 3 mana, we get a 2/3 Human Soldier with Outlast 1. So this one's a little bit cheaper. And additionally, each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter has flying. Now, this is not very relevant for Atraxa, but it is very relevant for all the other creatures that are the walkies kind that just want to go and hoof it across the battlefield, and giving it evasion is very nice. Like, for example, Algae Gharial would like that. Yeah.
Next is Tuskguard Captain. For 2 and a green, we get a 2/3 Human Warrior with Outlast for 1 green. And each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. So for cards that don't have evasion, like the Crocodile or
Lumbernaut, or the Plant Vulture.
Yeah.
Plant Zombie.
It makes them a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, and of course Atraxa does not have trample, so this would be a nice addition for that.
True.
Then we move on to Bread for the Hunt for 1, a green, and a blue. So for 3 mana, we get an enchantment that states that whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage to an opponent or to a player, you may draw a card, which is pretty sweet, which means we're going to be attacking our opponent. We're going to have lots of creatures with +1/+1 counters on it. Each one of those dealing damage is going to be drawing us a single card, which is, of course, going to get out of hand really fast.
Next is Marik Nightblade for 3 and a black. It's a 2/3 Orc Assassin with Outlast for 1 black, and it gives each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it Death Touch. So yeah, Atraxa already has Death Touch, but having all our other creatures also have Death Touch is very sweet.
Yeah, people don't like attacking into that.
Nope.
And people don't like blocking that either, for that matter. All right, then we have Abzan Battle Priest is next for 3 and a white. So for 4 mana, we get a 3/2 Human Cleric with Outlast of 1 white. And additionally, each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink. Now, once again, Atraxa not in the market for lifelink because she already has it. But all our other creatures, especially the ones that keep on growing and growing because of Proliferate as well, being able to swing in with a 10/10 and being able guaranteed gaining 10 life from that every single turn is, of course, super, super sweet. Even if you're not getting through, the lifelink is going to put you way ahead in the game.
True. Next is Herald of Secret Streams for 3 and a blue. It's a 2/3 Merfolk Warrior, and which basically gives all our creatures with a +1/+1 counter on it, which is pretty much everything. It makes them unblockable. So yeah, it's pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah, exactly. If you thought that flying and trample was good, move aside, because now we have unblockable, which is, of course, the mother of all evasion.
Yeah.
Super nice. Then we have Elite Scale Guard for 4 and a white. So for 5 mana, we get a 2/3 Human Soldier. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to bolster 2, which means we're going to put 2+1/+1 counters on whichever creature has the lowest toughness. That's not going to be Atraxa. So this can't be used to give her counters, but we're just going to give it to something else or to this Elite Scale Guard. But most importantly, it states that whenever a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter attacks, we're going to tap target creature defending player controls. And this is, of course, super nice if we don't have any form of evasion, to make sure that the creatures that our opponents want to use to block with, when we attack, we're going to tap those things. Now they can't block anymore. Bam, we're getting through with a lot of damage. And of course, it's extra fun to not do this towards the person whose turn is next, because if we hit somebody else, and then the next player will also be able to attack that same player, because those cards, of course, will not have untapped yet. So we get to put somebody in a really sticky situation with that.
Yeah.
Then we move on to the cards that give us protection.
Yeah. The first card that gives us protection is Undying Evil for 1 black. It's an instant. Target creature gains Undying till the end of turn, which means that if it dies and it didn't have any +1/+1 counters on it, like for example Atraxa, we get to bring it back to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it.
Yeah, this card may seem very simple, it may not seem very like a big effect, but needless to say, when Atraxa is on the battlefield and she does not have the +1/+1 counter on it, and just keeping that single black open means that whenever our opponent says, ha, I got the removal, now I'm going to get rid of her before she gets the counter or before she gets out of control, bam, all of a sudden you play this. Not only did they waste the removal on it, but it's also come back and now it's got a +1/+1 counter, which means in the end of your turn again, it's going to get another counter and it can really start growing. So it's a card that really turns the game around, I think.
Yeah, true.
Next is Feat of Resistance for 1 and a white. So for 2 mana, we get an instant, and we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, and then that creature gains protection from the color of our choice. So this is another perfect example of Atraxa's on the battlefield. You know, just mind your own business. You know, she's not doing anybody no harm. Well, she probably is, but somebody says no more. I'm going to use my removal, my deal 4 or 5 damage to target creature, and then you can say, okay, not only do I say it's protection from red, for example, so it doesn't take the damage anymore, or it can't be targeted by the removal. Not only that, but also it's now got a +1/+1 counter, which means it can start growing and get out of control.
Yep. Next is Inspiring Call for 2 and a green. It's an instant that makes us draw a card for each creature that we control. With a +1/+1 counter on it, and those creatures gain indestructible till the end of turn. So whenever somebody plays a board wipe, we get to protect our creatures, and in addition, we also get to draw a card for each card that we have with a +1/+1 counter on it.
Yeah, so that's of course extra sweet because it's again one of those examples of not only did they not do the thing they wanted to do, which was wipe the board, kill all your stuff, but now as well we got a bunch of cards on top of that,
which can be quite a lot of cards.
It's going to be super nasty. Then we move on to I love this card. Plex Caster Frogling for 1 a green and really a blue. Cute. It's a cute little 0/0 frog mutant. You wouldn't say it's a mutant by the looks of it. It just looks like a regular frog with a funky hairstyle.
A bit hairy though.
Exactly. I don't know about that. All right. Okay. Frog mutant it is. It comes in, it has Graft 3, which means it comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's a 3/3 for 3. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we get to move one of those counters onto the new creature if we want to. Additionally, for 2 mana, we get to give target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it Shroud until the end of turn. This is massive. This is so beautiful because on turn 3, ideal scenario, you play Plex Caster Frogling. It's a 3/3. Next turn, Atraxa comes in. Immediately, we give one of those +1/+1 counters to Atraxa, and then every turn after that, as long as we got 2 mana open, we can give either the Frog or Atraxa Shroud for 2 mana, which basically means target removal does not really work against them anymore. So they're gonna have to wipe the board. Very nice.
Next is Sporeback Troll for 3 and a green. We get a 0/0 with Graft 2. And also if we pay one and a green, we get to regenerate target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. We don't have to tap this card to do that, so we can do that to multiple creatures at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. This is, again, one of those great examples. Works well against target removal that says destroy or deal so much damage. But
board wipe.
But also works, exactly,
Yeah.
also works well against board wipes, which of course the Frogling won't protect against. But if we got this one, we can help against destroy all creatures, and then we just regenerate them. Then we have Miraculous Recovery for 4 and a white. So for 5 mana, we get an instant, and we're going to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So of course, if we got a nice creature that we want to get back, we can already get the ball rolling with that extra +1/+1 counter. It's nice as well because should Atraxa die and we have this card in our hand, we're just going to let it go to the graveyard, not to the command zone, which means then if our opponent should attack us with a creature because they think we don't have Atraxa, instant speed, we're going to be able to get Atraxa back to the battlefield, block with it, it's going to have a +1/+1 counter, and then at the end of our turn again, it's going to start growing because it's going to have that counter. So it's a very swingy card as well. People are not expecting it, you're going to block with it, it's going to be offensive.
Last of the protection cards is Necromantic Summons. For 4 and a black, we get a sorcery, which means that we can, or which states that we can take a card out of a graveyard, also from our opponents, which is strong in itself, and it has Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in our graveyard, it comes in with an additional +2 +1/+1 counters on it.
Yeah, so this is, of course, sorcery speed, so we can't do it instant speed, but still, being able to get the best thing in any graveyard, playing multiplayer, people are going to be playing fatties. We're going to take the biggest thing. Additionally, most likely, it's going to come in with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, which means that, of course, Atraxa is going to add an additional counter at the end of our turn. It's going to start growing. It's just beautiful.
We're going to make very big fatties with
very
this.
big fatties. That is awesome. Those are the cards that have counter synergy. Let's have a look at the removal cards. We divided the removal cards into 3 categories: the -1/-1 counters, the instant speed removal cards, and the board wipes. We're going to start with Serrated Arrows. It costs 4 mana. It's an artifact that enters the battlefield with 3 arrowhead counters on it. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if it has no more arrowhead counters, we're going to have to sacrifice it. Okay, so what can we do with those arrowhead counters? In essence, we can tap and remove an arrowhead counter from Serrated Arrows, then put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Then, of course, at the end of our turn with the Atraxa, we can proliferate, which means we're going to put another arrowhead counter back on Serrated Arrows and put an additional -1/-1 counter on whichever creature we put the -1/-1 counter on it. And, of course, that means that, again, Serrated Arrow has 3 counters on it, and we can repeat the process again next turn. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Next is the Wickerbow Elder. For 3 and a green, we get a 4/4, and it enters the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. Now, you might think, -1/-1, we don't want that, but we can use those to destroy target artifact or enchantment if we pay 1 green. Now, we first want to make sure we get more of those counters. By Proliferate can help us with that. And then once we have more than 1, we can start using them to destroy artifacts or enchantments.
Yeah, pretty nice.
Yeah.
Then we have Carnufex Demon for 4 and 2 black. So for 6 mana, we get a 6/6 Flying Demon. Now this guy comes in with 2 -1/-1 counters on it, so it's actually a 4/4 when it comes in. But for a black, we can remove a -1/-1 counter and then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature. Now you may think, wait a minute, that also includes our creatures. We don't want to do that because then Atraxa is going to be smaller, or maybe some of our creatures are going to die. In reality, it's not so bad because actually, by the time that this card comes onto the battlefield, we're going to have a lot of creatures, and we're going to have those creatures are all going to have multiple +1/+1 counters, 4, 5 +1/+1 counters. So doing this one time is just going to put 1 -1/-1 counter on all our creatures. In actuality, those are going to cancel out with the +1/+1 counter. So okay, they're all our creatures are going to become 1 smaller. But our opponents will have -1/-1 counters put on them. And of course, at the end of our turn, we're going to proliferate all our +1/+1 counters. So actually, we're back to where we started. And our opponents are going to actually have 2 -1/-1 counters on them, which will actually kill a lot of stuff. And of course, if that's not enough, then we do it again next turn. So that's pretty sweet. And then we're left with a 6/6 Flying Demon, which is also nothing to sniff at.
Next is Azureus Charm. For a white and a blue, we get to choose creatures you control gain lifelink till the end of turn, or draw a card, or put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. So gaining lifelink when we attack with a lot of big fatties can be very useful, but also putting target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library can be very handy if they attack you with a big guy, or if you want to attack them and they have a good blocker. Can be very helpful.
Exactly. Of course, these are part of the instant speed removals. Is not part of the -1/-1 counters anymore. So we move on to Celestia Charm for a green and a white. It's an instant. I'm not going to say that anymore because these are all instants. We got one of three options. Either a target creature gets +2/+2 and trample. Might be nice to put it against an extremely large guy to give him trample when people don't expect it. We can also exile target creature with power 5 or greater. That's nice with those indestructible creatures, those creatures with regenerate, and those big fatties that we want to get rid of. Or finally, put a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield. We're not going to be using that one. The other two are way more useful.
Next is Simic Charm for a green and a blue. We get to choose target creature gets +3/+3 until the end of turn, or permanents you control gain hexproof till the end of turn, or target creature or return target creature to its owner's hand. So the second one, gaining hexproof, can be very handy. Also returning target creature to its owner's hand. If they have a very big or annoying creature, you can get rid of it.
Yeah, just bouncing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not permanent removal, but I mean, usually we're going to be using this for making all our stuff hexproof, which is of course super nice. Yeah. But you know, bouncing something's not the end of the world. Next up is Mortify for 1, a white and a black. So for 3 mana, it's an instant. We're going to be destroying target creature or enchantment. I mean, we like destroying creatures. That's usually what we're going to be doing. But sometimes you have those pesky enchantments, and it's nice that Mortify gives that option.
Yep. Next is Putrefy for 1, a black and a green. Destroy target artifact or creature, and it cannot be regenerated. Well, it's good instant removal.
Yeah. Now instead of being able to hit an enchantment, we're going to be able to hit an artifact.
Oh, sorry.
Then we have Sultai Charm for black, a green, and a blue. So for 3 mana, it's an instant. We're going to either destroy target mono-colored creature, we're going to be destroying an artifact or enchantment, or we're going to be drawing 2 cards and then discarding a card. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of multicolored creatures out there, but still... Commander is still dominated by monocolored creatures. Perhaps not the commanders, but the regular good creatures are usually all monocolored. We're going to be able to hit a lot of stuff. Probably not commanders. But also, I like it that it gives us the flexibility to hit a creature or an artifact or an enchantment. And if not, you can always draw 2 cards and discard a card. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. True. Next is Absent Charm for a white, a black, and a green. We get to exile target creature with power 3 or greater, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, or we can distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. So basically the first one is really good, destroying target creature with power 3 or greater, getting...
It's exile, which makes it actually way
exile,
better
yeah,
than
it's
destroying.
even
That's
better.
What makes it so good.
Yeah, true. And distributing counters can also be fun if we get to make them bigger, get more counters.
Well, I think actually Atraxa doesn't come in with the counter, so it's nice to be able to this one, if push comes to shove, we don't have a creature with graph, we don't have a thing that gives a +1/+1 counter, then this card at least gives us, okay, we'll just give Atraxa a counter like that.
Yeah, true.
Next up is Bant Charm for a green, a white, and a blue. So for 3 mana, instant, we're going to choose one of 3 things. Either destroy target artifact, okay? Put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library. That's also very nasty. Mm-hmm. That's such a great spell. Or counter target instant spell. So it's nice little protection against the counter spells, for example, or against instant speed removal. But also the fact that that creature, we can put it at the bottom of owner's library. People can't get it back from the graveyard. It's like exile, actually. It's actually very nice. Yeah, it's very strong.
Yeah. Next is Other End for 2, a white and a black. And we get to exile target non-land permanent. This is really good because it's exile, like you just said, and it's also a non-land permanent, which is pretty much any card on the battlefield.
Yeah. I mean, people can still keep those lands, but who cares? Yeah. It even hits planeswalkers. It hits just everything, everything you want. Yeah. Then we move on to the board wipes, and the first one is Languish for 2 and 2 black. It's a sorcery. It states all creatures get -4/-4 till the end of turn. Now, this is a very nice little board wipe, which also can hit Atraxa if we didn't put a +1/+1 counter on her. So make sure that Atraxa has at least 1 +1/+1 counter, so she's at least a 5/5, and make sure she does not die to this, because that's kind of sad when Atraxa dies to Language.
We don't want that.
And also it's important to remember that this is -4/-4 till the end of turn, and it is not -4/-4 counters. So it's just, it doesn't have anything to do with proliferate, and it doesn't stay, it's just stuff dies this turn or it doesn't die, and then that's over. But it's nice because also creatures with regenerate and creatures with indestructible don't survive the -4/-4 when their toughness goes below 0.
Next is Divine Reckoning for 2 and 2 white. Each player gets to choose a creature that he or she really likes, doesn't want to say goodbye to, because they're going to have to say goodbye to the rest. And also, it has flashback for 7, which means that when we can play it again from our graveyard, which might come as a surprise.
Absolutely. People always forget that this thing's in your graveyard, usually because you shuffle it way below and people don't see it anymore.
Make sure you don't forget it yourself.
You probably forget it yourself, but yeah, if you don't, it comes as a rude surprise when people have rebuilt their boards and you say, no, you know what, you're going to have to do it again. Pretty nasty. Yeah. Dune Blast is next for 4, a white, a black, and a green. So for 7 mana, it's a sorcery. We're going to choose one creature. It's going to be Atraxa. And then we're going to destroy all the rest. That is so nasty. Especially if Atraxa's already been getting a couple of +1/+1 counters. Maybe she's a 7/7. Very realistically, 8/8, maybe even bigger. And then all of a sudden, everybody's lost all their creatures, and you still have that Vigilance 8/8 lifelinker attacking every turn. I mean, this is also commander damage that Atraxa is doing. So if she does 21 points of damage, your opponent is dead, and she can do that so incredibly easily. Well, those are the removal cards. Let's have a look at the utility cards.
We divided the utility cards into draw and ramp cards. The first draw card is Simic Guildmage. For a green and a blue, it's a 2/2 elf warrior, and if we pay a green and a blue, all creatures that come into play this turn under our control enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And if we pay a green and a blue, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature we control and draw a card. So with Proliferate, we're going to have more and more +1/+1 counters, allowing us to draw more and more cards.
Yeah, and for 2 mana every time, that's a really good deal. Next up is Shapers of Nature for 1, a green and a blue. So for 3 mana, we get a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman. That's pretty nice body already for just 3 mana. And additionally, for 3 and a green, so for 4 mana, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Now, this is, of course, more expensive than Simic Guildmage's ability, which was just for 2 mana. But with Simic Guildmage, we have to do it on the turn it comes in, whereas Shaper of Nature can do it any time. So later on as well, we can just pay it and start adding counters to Atraxa, for example. It doesn't matter when. Additionally, for 2 and a blue, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature we control and then draw a card. Once again, just a little bit more expensive than Simic Guildmage's ability, which is, of course, for only 2. This time we don't need green, though, so take it for what you will. I don't think it's better, but 2 times this ability in the deck is not bad at all.
Yeah. Next is Fathom Mage. For 2, a green and a blue, it's a 1/1 with Evolve. So every time another creature comes in that has greater power or toughness, she's going to grow. And whenever a counter is placed on this card, you may draw a card. So again, with Proliferate, at the end of our turn, we're going to get extra counters, drawing extra cards.
Every turn
we can draw a
and
card,
additionally, of course, at the beginning, when bigger stuff comes in, it's going to be getting counters too. So not too shabby. Yeah. Then we've got Give and Take. So this is a split card. The first part is Give for 2 and a green. So for 3 mana, it's a sorcery that allows us to put 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature. So that's nice. As we said earlier, Atraxa doesn't have the +1/+1 counters. This is another ability that allows us to put a few on there. And we have Take, which is for 2 and a blue. So for 3 mana, also sorcery. Remove all +1/+1 counters from target creature. You may draw that many cards. So yes, sometimes we may do the Give part. Yes, but usually we will do the Take part because it just allows us to draw so many cards. Of course, if we pay it both for 6, even if we've got no counters, we do get to draw 3 cards. I don't recommend it. I say you go look if you see a Lumber Knot or something like that along the battlefield, which has upwards of 10 +1/+1 counters on them, and then we're going to be playing Take. And then we're going to be drawing tons and tons of cards. And of course, that is beautiful for just 3 mana.
Next is Prime Speaker Zagana. For 2 green and 2 blue, it's a 1/1. When she enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And when she enters the battlefield, we get to draw cards equal to its power. So if, for example, we have Atraxa on the battlefield, which is a 4/4, Prime Speaker Zagana is going to come in as a 5/5, and we get to draw 5 cards.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And once again, if there's a Fungus Vulture plant thing on the battlefield, which is even bigger, is going to be only sweeter. Then we go to the last one of the draw. That is Myojin of Winds for 7, a blue, and another blue. So that is for 10 mana. You think, okay, this thing better be 2020, right? When is it? Is that expensive? It is a 3/3 spirit, so that's a wah-wah. You think, okay, great. It better have some awesome abilities. It does. When it comes into play, we put a divinity counter on it, and a divinity counter on it means it has indestructible, which is pretty cool. So it's an indestructible 3/3, nice little blocker, but nothing so far yet to really warrant the 10 mana. It also states remove a divinity counter from it and then draw a card for each permanent you control. Now, what is important to remember is that normally you can only do this once per game because you don't have any ways of replacing divinity counters. But of course, with Proliferate, we're going to put multiple divinity counters on Myojin. It doesn't mean it gets multiple cases of indestructibility because it's redundant, but it does mean that pretty much every single turn we can remove a divinity counter, still having enough divinity counters on it for it to be indestructible. And of course, we'll be drawing a card for each permanent we control. Now, what usually is the case with these things, it's for each creature you control, or for each creature with a +1/+1 counter, or maybe even for each non-land permanent. But this is permanent, which means also your lands. So that means you're going to be drawing upwards of 20 cards every single turn. Now, you can mill yourself with this, so be careful. But I mean, if you're going to be drawing that many cards per turn, you're going to be winning the game. So that is just plain nasty. And we move on to the ramp cards.
Yeah, next is Ever-Flowing Chalice for 0. We get an artifact that we can kick for 2, and it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. So you can kick it as many times as you want, but that's not going to be necessary with Proliferate. If we have one counter, it can grow to more counters, and then we can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool for each counter on this card.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. This thing's going to get out of control real fast, tapping for 10 mana easy at some points in time, which is nasty. A very similar card is Astral Cornucopia for XXX. It's an artifact that comes in the battlefield with X charge counters on it. And we can tap it and choose a color and then add 1 mana of that color to our mana pool for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia, which means we're probably going to be paying 3 mana for this card. It's going to come in with 1 charge counter. And then, of course, at the end of each turn with Proliferate, we're going to put another charge counter on it, giving us 2 mana, and then 3 mana, and then 4 mana, etc.
Yep. Next is a Sphere of the Suns for 2. It's an artifact, and it enters the battlefield tapped and with 3 charge counters on it. And when we tap it, we can remove a charge counter and add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Well, usually this is going to run out after 3 times, but with Proliferate, we're going to get extra counters, which allows us to tap it for any color, basically any turn.
Yeah, exactly. Very nice. Only for 2 mana. Yeah. Very similar card, Pentad Prism for 2 mana. It's got Sunburst, which means it comes in with a charge counter for each color used. We've got 4 colors in this deck, so we can pretty much always make sure it comes in with 2 charge counters. And we can remove a charge counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Now, what's cool about this one is that we can remove as many charge counters as we want. So as this thing stays on the battlefield and we've got the Proliferate, we're going to be able to make sure it grows from 2 to 3 to 4. If we don't need to use the mana, we can just have it go 5, 6, 7. And of course, anytime we want, we can just say, okay, if it's got 5 charge counters on it, we'll just take off 4. We can use 4 right away in addition to any other mana we've got. And as long as we still leave that 1 charge counter on there, we can make sure that it keeps on growing again next turn. So it's a nice little battery.
Yep. Next is Fertilite for 2 and a green. It's a 0/0 and it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So as a 2/2, and we can pay 1 and a green and remove a +1/+1 counter from it and get to look for a land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So basically every turn we get to look for a land and play it.
Yeah, that is pretty sweet. Just an infinite amount of mana ramp we get to do every single turn. And of course, what is it? What does this card look like? You mentioned this before.
It's a potato ant.
It is a potato ant. It says elemental here, but they will have to change that soon to potato ant. I hope there's tribal support for potato ant. I would love to play that in Commander. Next up is Realm Seekers for 4 and 2 green for 6 mana. It's a 0/0 Elf Scout. Now this guy enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is a total number of cards in all players' hand. Now we're playing multiplayer Commander. A lot of people are greedy So they're going to have a lot of cards in their hand, 7 or more, some people when they've got ways of keeping more cards in hand. So this thing could come in as a monstrosity. And additionally, we can pay 2 and a green. So for 3 mana, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from it and search our library for a land and then put it into our hand. So not as good as Fertilid in the sense that we're not going to be able to ramp us by putting it onto the battlefield straight away. It does allow us to make sure that we can fix ourselves and make sure that we don't miss our land drop every single turn. But in the end, it's also just going to be an abomination on the battlefield. It's just going to be super, super big. Yeah. So that is, of course, super nice. Those are the utility cards. Let's have a look at the lands. We divided the lands into 4 plains, 5 islands, 5 swamps, 5 forests, and 19 non-basic lands. We're going to start with Opal Palace. Now this one can tap for a colorless mana, but additionally we can pay 1 mana and tap this land to add a mana of 1 mana call of any of our commander's color identity. And if we spend that mana to play our commander, then it's going to come in with an additional +1/+1 counter for each time it's been played from the command zone, which of course means right from the beginning already is going to be getting a +1/+1 counter, and then 2 +1/+1 counters, and then 3 +1/+1 counters. It's going to get big and big, and of course Atraxa loves those +1/+1 counters.
Next is Vivid Meadow, which is a white land, and it enters the battlefield tapped with 2 charge counters on it. You can just tap it for a white land or for white mana, or you can tap it and remove a charge counter and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Well, usually you can only do this twice, but in this deck you can pretty much do it unlimited amount of times. And then we have Vivid Creek, which is pretty much the same, but then in blue. Vivid March, which is the same, but then in black, and Vivid Grove in green.
Exactly. Next is Mirrodin's Core. It's a land that taps for a colorless mana. It comes in untapped, which is nice. Additionally, we can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and then we can also tap it to remove a charge counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. So basically, if we just, on the turn it comes in, tap it to put a charge counter on it, from that point on, as long as we got the Proliferate engine going, we can basically tap it for any color we want.
Next is Matron Network. We can tap it to add 1 mana to our mana pool. We can pay 1, tap it, and put a storage counter on it. Or we can tap it, remove X storage counters from it, and add X to our mana pool.
Yeah, so this is again one of those great examples of something that we just pay 1 mana, tap it, we put a charge counter on, and then later with Proliferate it's going to grow, and then later when we do want that mana, we do want that colossal amount of mana, we can just empty that all from the Majoring Network when we need something useful to do with it. Novajin Heart of Progress is next. It can tap for a colorless mana, and we can also pay a green and a blue and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So that is pretty nice. We play a couple of creatures, but even if not, even just per 1 creature, it's not bad.
Yep. Next is Exotic Orchard. We can tap it, add to your mana pool 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce, which in multiplayer is pretty much any color.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we go on to Seaside Citadel. It enters the battlefield tapped though, but it can give us either green, white, or blue, which is very similar to Opulent Palace, which also comes in tapped, gives us either black, green, or blue, or Arcane Sanctum, which also comes in tapped, gives us either white, blue, or black, and finally Sandstep Citadel, which also comes in tapped and gives us either white, black, or green.
Yep. Next is Azureus Chancery. It enters the battlefield tapped. It's a white-blue land, and when it comes in, you do have to return a land to your hand, but then again, it does give you 2 mana, white and blue. Almost the same as Orzhov Basilica, but then for white and for black. Golgari Rot Farm for black and green. And Simic Growth Chamber for green and blue.
Yeah, it's very important to remember as well that later on when we do play this, remember that you can tap the land to spend the mana, and then later on play this card and then return the tapped land back to your hand. So you don't have to put a land that you haven't used yet that turn back to your hand. You make sure you use that to get the most value out of it. And then finally we top it all off with Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds, which come in and we can tap them and sacrifice them to search our library for any basic land and put it into the battlefield. Tapped. Format staples, very useful. Those are all the lands. Let's have a look at the conclusion.
In conclusion, this deck is a lot of fun. It has a very strong commander, which could win you the game by itself. With the counters on it, you can deal a lot of commander damage with it. And in addition, it has this big army of guys with counters on them, which boost each other with their abilities.
Yeah, there's a reason why Atraxa is one of the most popular commanders out there right now. As Lisa already said, it is incredibly powerful by itself, but when used in combination with the +1/+1 counters, it gets out of control insanely fast. I love the fact that by herself she can do stuff, and of course the whole team effort. One game you're going to have all your stuff. With Trample, you're going to have a big fatty growing. Another time you're going to be being a little bit more slower, all focused on the commander herself. Another time you're going to be maybe using some of those charge counters. It's wildly different every single time. It's never the same. You get different abilities every single time, but you're never at a loss for something to do, because that proliferate is just it's just a great mechanic. It's simply just a great mechanic.
It has a lot of synergy.
It has great synergy, and I really love it. It feels very strong, especially late game. This deck is not an early game, even though it's got a lot of low-costed creatures and stuff, but it really comes to its right late game when you've had a couple of turns to proliferate, when you've made sure that all your Outlast creatures have gotten their +1/+1 counters, when all that stuff has first strike, death touch, everybody's flying, and then your opponent just can't do anything about it anymore, because even when they want to do targeted removal, you got stuff to give stuff hexproof, you got stuff to give stuff regenerate, you get instants that make sure your stuff has hexproof. The removal package is so flexible. Everything you've got has got 3 options, so there's nothing people can do, and that is just a great feeling, and I love it.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's very affordable. It's below $50.
That's not too shabby for a commander that already takes up almost half the cost of the entire deck. So we were able to squeeze it still in under $50, because after all, it should still be fun and affordable, right?
Yep.
Also, we'd like to remind you guys that we have a Patreon page. If you like this deck, if you want us to make more videos like this, head on over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks and consider donating as little as $1. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, and it does have a lot of cool content, like me hitting David in the face with a pie. You do not want to miss that.
A pie? Really? Was what, a pie?
It was like 12, I think.
Yes, it was a lot of pies.
Yeah.
Also, join us on Facebook and on Twitter at BudgetMTGDecks, where we have discussions. We're going to be talking about some non-budget upgrades for this deck over there, so head on over and we can check out those cards over there. We can have discussions about this deck as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe to us here for the most powerful decks and advice everyone can afford. And if you do hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit the little bell button next to it, because it will let you know when a new video comes out. And if you don't hit that bell button, you won't be notified, which is a shame. Well, that's it. Before we go, if you do have suggestions for us for what the next commander should be that we're going to tackle, why don't you leave us a comment and let us know what you think is the next commander we should tackle. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm David.
And I'm Lisa.
And this was Budget MTG Decks.